Colonel Marcus Thompson stepped out of the black sedan, his polished boots hitting the concrete with authority. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Davidson as he surveyed his new command. At 45, Thompson was known throughout the military for his strict adherence to protocol and his unwavering belief in maintaining proper military standards. His reputation preceded him wherever he went, and today was no different. The driver handed him his briefcase and saluted crisply. Thompson barely acknowledged the gesture as his eyes swept across the base, taking mental notes of everything he observed. The grass needed cutting, some of the building facades showed signs of wear, and he spotted at least 3 soldiers whose uniforms didn't meet his exacting standards. This would need to change, and quickly. Thompson had been transferred to Fort Davidson with a specific mission, to restore discipline and order to what headquarters considered a somewhat lax installation. The previous commanding officer had been well liked but had perhaps been too lenient with regulations. Thompson was here to fix that problem, and he intended to start immediately. As he walked toward the administration building, Thompson noticed a group of soldiers gathered near the commissary. They were chatting casually, their posture relaxed in a way that immediately set his teeth on edge. Military bearing should be maintained at all times, regardless of whether they were on or off duty. He made another mental note to address this during his first staff meeting. Inside the building, Thompson was greeted by his aide, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a young officer who had graduated top of her class from West Point. She had been briefed on the new colonel's expectations and was prepared for the demanding leadership style he was known for. "Colonel Thompson, welcome to Fort Davidson," Chen said, her salute textbook perfect. "I have your schedule prepared for the day, and Major Roberts is waiting in your office for the briefing you requested." Thompson nodded approvingly. At least someone here understood proper military protocol. "Very good, Lieutenant. Before we begin, I want you to arrange a base-wide inspection for tomorrow morning. Full dress uniform, 0800 hours. I want every soldier, every piece of equipment, and every facility examined thoroughly." Chen's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. "Yes, sir. Should I notify the department heads to prepare their units?" "They should always be prepared, Lieutenant. That's what being a soldier means." Thompson's tone left no room for discussion. "Now, let's meet this Major Roberts." Major James Roberts was waiting in the colonel's office, standing at attention beside the desk. At 52, Roberts was one of the most senior officers on the base, with nearly 3 decades of military service behind him. His uniform was impeccable, every ribbon and decoration precisely positioned according to regulations. What immediately caught Thompson's attention, however, was a particular medal among Roberts' decorations, one that seemed somehow out of place on what appeared to be a career desk officer. "Major Roberts reporting as ordered, sir," Roberts said, his voice steady and professional. Thompson circled around to his chair but remained standing, his eyes fixed on Roberts' uniform. The major was exactly what Thompson expected to find at Fort Davidson, an older officer who had probably spent the last decade pushing papers and managing logistics while younger, more dynamic leaders handled the real military work. "Major, I've been reviewing the personnel files, and I see you've been assigned to administrative duties here for the past 8 years. Quartermaster Operations, Supply Chain Management, Personnel Processing." Thompson's tone made it clear what he thought of such assignments. "Tell me, what experience do you have with actual military operations?" Roberts' expression didn't change, though something flickered briefly in his eyes. "I've served in various capacities throughout my career, sir. My current assignment involves ensuring this base operates efficiently and that our soldiers have everything they need to maintain readiness." Thompson wasn't satisfied with the diplomatic response. He walked around the desk again, this time stopping directly in front of Roberts. His gaze was drawn once more to the decorations on the major's uniform, particularly to one medal that seemed inconsistent with a career spent in administration. "Major, I notice you're wearing what appears to be a Medal of Honor," Thompson said, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. "That's quite unusual for someone with your background. Perhaps you could explain how you came to receive our nation's highest military decoration?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Roberts maintained his position at attention, his face showing no emotion, but those who knew him well might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes. The Medal of Honor wasn't something any soldier wore lightly, and questioning its legitimacy was a serious matter. "Sir, the medal was awarded for actions during Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan," Roberts replied simply. Thompson's expression grew more skeptical. He had heard stories of administrative errors, of medals being awarded incorrectly or decorations being worn inappropriately. In his experience, true heroes were usually found leading combat units, not managing supply inventories at quiet installations like Fort Davidson. "Afghanistan," Thompson repeated, his tone suggesting doubt. "Major, I've served with many genuine Medal of Honor recipients, and they're typically found in positions more befitting their status. Elite units, high-profile assignments, positions where their exceptional abilities can be fully utilized. Not managing paperwork at a training facility." The implication was clear, and it struck at the heart of military honor. Roberts had spent years avoiding attention, preferring to let his work speak for itself rather than trading on his past achievements. But Thompson's suggestion that he might be wearing decorations inappropriately was not something that could be overlooked. "Colonel, with respect, the medal was properly awarded and authenticated through all appropriate channels," Roberts said, his voice remaining calm despite the gravity of the situation. Thompson walked to his window, looking out at the base that was now under his command. He had encountered this before, older officers clinging to past glory, sometimes real but often exaggerated, using unearned decorations to maintain respect they couldn't command through current performance. It was exactly the kind of lax standard he had been sent to eliminate. "Major Roberts, I'm going to be direct with you," Thompson said without turning around. "I've been sent here to restore proper military standards to this installation. That includes ensuring that all personnel are properly representing themselves and their service record. I have serious concerns about the appropriateness of your wearing that particular decoration." The silence that followed was deafening. Roberts had faced enemy fire, had made decisions under pressure that saved lives and changed the course of battles, had been willing to sacrifice everything for his fellow soldiers. But he had never faced a challenge quite like this, having his honor questioned by a superior officer who had made assumptions based on incomplete information. "Sir, I understand your concern for maintaining proper standards," Roberts began carefully. "If you would like to review the documentation regarding the award, I can provide all necessary records." Thompson turned back from the window, his decision already made. "Major, until this matter can be properly investigated and resolved, I'm ordering you to remove that medal from your uniform. I won't have questions about legitimacy reflecting poorly on this command." The words hit Roberts like a physical blow. Being ordered to remove the Medal of Honor wasn't just about taking off a piece of metal and ribbon, it was about denying the sacrifice, the courage, and the blood that had earned it. It was about dismissing the men who had fought and died beside him, whose memory was honored by that medal as much as his own actions. Roberts stood perfectly still, his military training warring with his personal honor. To refuse a direct order would be insubordination, potentially ending his career in disgrace. To comply would mean accepting the implication that he was unworthy of the recognition he had earned through actions that still haunted his dreams. "Colonel, I respectfully request that you reconsider this order," Roberts said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "The medal represents not just my actions, but the sacrifice of soldiers who didn't make it home. Removing it without proper justification would be a disservice to their memory." Thompson's expression hardened. He saw Roberts' response as exactly the kind of insubordination disguised as principle that had allowed standards to slip at Fort Davidson. An order was an order, regardless of personal feelings or claimed justifications. "Major, you have your orders. Remove the medal, or I'll have you written up for failure to comply with a direct command. The choice is yours, but make it now." The confrontation had reached a critical point. Around the office, the few other personnel present watched in uncomfortable silence, sensing that something significant was happening but not fully understanding the implications. Roberts looked at Thompson for a long moment, seeing in the colonel's eyes a certainty that brooked no argument. Slowly, with hands that had once carried wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire, Roberts reached up and began to unpin the Medal of Honor from his uniform. Each movement was precise and deliberate, but those watching could see the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about following orders, it was about respect, honor, and the assumptions people make about others based on limited information. As the medal came free from his uniform, Roberts held it for a moment, feeling its weight in his palm. Then, he placed it carefully on Thompson's desk, his movements controlled and professional despite what this action represented. "Medal removed as ordered, sir," Roberts said, his voice carrying no emotion. Thompson looked at the medal on his desk, then back at Roberts. "Thank you, Major. This matter will be investigated properly, and if the award is legitimate, it will of course be restored. I'm simply ensuring we maintain proper standards." Roberts nodded once. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Yes, Major. I want a complete inventory of all base assets ready for my review by end of business today. And I want reports on the current status of all ongoing projects and operations." Thompson was already moving on, treating the incident as a minor administrative matter rather than the profound moment it represented for Roberts. "Understood, sir. I'll have those reports prepared." Roberts saluted crisply, waited for Thompson's return salute, then turned and walked toward the door. As Roberts left the office, Thompson turned his attention to other matters, satisfied that he had begun the process of establishing proper order at Fort Davidson. He had no way of knowing that the man he had just humiliated was about to become the center of a story that would challenge everything he thought he knew about courage, leadership, and the true meaning of military honor. Outside the administration building, word of what had happened was already beginning to spread. The military community was small, and news of a Medal of Honor recipient being ordered to remove his decoration traveled quickly through informal channels. Soldiers who had served with Roberts, who had seen him quietly go about his duties without ever mentioning his past heroics, began to realize that their unassuming colleague had a history none of them had suspected. For Roberts himself, the walk back to his office felt longer than any patrol he had ever made through hostile territory. The weight of the missing medal was far heavier than the decoration itself had ever been. But he maintained his composure, his military bearing intact despite the personal cost of what had just occurred. He had a job to do, reports to prepare, and soldiers depending on him to maintain the smooth operation of the base. What Thompson didn't yet understand was that true military honor couldn't be removed with the taking off of a medal. It lived in the actions that earned the recognition, in the principles that guided decisions under pressure, and in the character that defined a soldier's service. Roberts had demonstrated that honor in ways that went far beyond what any decoration could represent, and the events that were about to unfold would reveal the full scope of what the colonel had failed to understand about the man he had just ordered to remove the nation's highest military honor. News traveled fast on a military base, especially news as shocking as what had happened in Colonel Thompson's office. By noon, whispers were circulating through every department, mess hall, and barracks room. The details varied with each telling, but the core message remained the same: Major Roberts had been ordered to remove his Medal of Honor. Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez was working in the supply depot when she heard the news from Corporal Jenkins, who had gotten it from someone in administration. At first, she didn't believe it. She had worked closely with Major Roberts for 3 years and had always been impressed by his professionalism and dedication, but she had never known about any Medal of Honor. "You're telling me that Major Roberts, our Major Roberts, has a Medal of Honor?" Gonzalez asked, setting down the inventory clipboard she had been working with. "The same guy who makes sure we get extra socks shipped in before winter exercises?" Jenkins nodded, his expression serious. "That's what I heard. And, apparently the new colonel thinks there's something fishy about it. Ordered him to take it off right there in the office." Gonzalez felt a knot forming in her stomach. She had served under incompetent officers before, had seen what happened when someone in authority made decisions based on assumptions rather than facts. If Major Roberts really was a Medal of Honor recipient, and if Colonel Thompson had publicly questioned his integrity, this situation was about to become much bigger than a simple misunderstanding. Meanwhile, in the communications center, Technical Sergeant David Park was having a similar conversation with his team. Park had been in the Army for 15 years and had served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He knew the weight that came with certain decorations, and he knew that Medal of Honor recipients weren't common. If Roberts had one, there was definitely a story behind it. I'm going to look into this, Park told his subordinates. If Major Roberts earned that medal, we need to know about it. And, if he didn't, we need to know that too. Park had access to military databases through his communications role, and he knew how to research service records when necessary. He also had contacts at other installations who might be able to provide information about Roberts' service history. If there was a story to be uncovered, Park was determined to find it. Colonel Thompson, unaware of the growing interest his decision had generated, was settling into his new office and reviewing base operations. He had scheduled meetings with department heads throughout the afternoon, planning to establish his command philosophy and expectations for each unit. The incident with Major Roberts was already fading from his immediate concerns, filed away as a necessary but minor administrative action. His first meeting was with Captain Lisa Rodriguez, the base chaplain. Rodriguez was a seasoned officer who had served in various roles before accepting her current assignment. She had a reputation for being direct but diplomatic, and Thompson was curious to get her assessment of base morale and discipline. Captain Rodriguez, I appreciate you making time for this meeting, Thompson began as she entered his office. I'm interested in your perspective on the current state of this installation. From a morale and discipline standpoint, what are your observations? Rodriguez took her seat, noting the Medal of Honor that still lay on Thompson's desk where Roberts had placed it hours earlier. She had already heard about the confrontation, and seeing the decoration sitting there like evidence in a criminal case made her deeply uncomfortable. Sir, Fort Davidson has generally maintained good morale and high operational standards, she began carefully. The soldiers here are dedicated and professional. We've had very few disciplinary issues, and unit cohesion has been strong. Thompson nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. Captain, I've observed some concerning trends already. Soldiers with poor military bearing, lax attention to uniform standards, casual attitudes toward protocol. These may seem like minor issues, but they often indicate deeper problems with discipline and leadership. Rodriguez chose her words carefully. She had been hoping to avoid discussing the Roberts situation directly, but the medal on Thompson's desk made that impossible to ignore. Colonel, may I ask about the circumstances surrounding that decoration? Thompson glanced at the medal, then back at Rodriguez. You've heard about my meeting with Major Roberts, I assume. Word travels quickly on a base this size. Yes, sir. The soldiers are concerned about the situation. Major Roberts is well respected here, and questions about his integrity are affecting morale. Thompson's expression hardened. Captain, the medal is being held pending verification of its legitimacy. I have serious concerns about whether it was properly earned, and I won't allow potentially fraudulent decorations to be worn in my command. Rodriguez felt her heart rate increase. She had counseled soldiers through many difficult situations, but this was venturing into territory that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. Sir, with respect, Medal of Honor awards are extensively documented and verified. The likelihood of fraud would be extremely small. Perhaps, Thompson replied. But Major Roberts' current assignment and career pattern don't suggest the kind of exceptional service typically associated with our highest decoration. I've seen too many cases of administrative errors or inappropriate award recommendations to take such things at face value. Rodriguez realized that Thompson's concerns weren't based on evidence of wrongdoing, but rather on his preconceptions about what a Medal of Honor recipient should look like. This was a dangerous foundation for such a serious accusation, and she knew it needed to be addressed carefully. Colonel, if I may suggest, perhaps we could research Major Roberts' service record before making any final determinations. The Army maintains detailed records of all decorations, particularly one as significant as the Medal of Honor. Thompson considered this suggestion. He had been planning to initiate such research anyway, but having it come from the chaplain reinforced his sense that he was taking appropriate action. You're right, Captain. I'll have Lieutenant Chen begin that process immediately. Until we have clear documentation, the medal remains off limits. As Rodriguez left the meeting, she felt compelled to action. She had seen enough injustice in her military career to recognize it when it was developing, and she wasn't going to stand by while a good soldier's reputation was destroyed by assumptions and prejudice. She decided to begin her own quiet investigation into Major Roberts' background. Technical Sergeant Park was already making progress on his research. Using his access to military personnel systems, he had been able to pull up basic information about Roberts' service record. What he found immediately contradicted Thompson's assumptions about the Major's career. Roberts had served multiple combat deployments between 2002 and 2010, including 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. His assignments during that period had included infantry units, special operations support, and forward operating base security. This was far from the career of a desk officer who had never seen combat. Park printed out what he could access and decided to reach out to contacts who might have served with Roberts during those deployments. The military community was interconnected in ways that civilians often didn't understand, and if Roberts had done something worthy of the Medal of Honor, there would be people who remembered it. Meanwhile, Staff Sergeant Gonzalez was conducting her own investigation through informal channels. She had called her sister, who worked in personnel management at Fort Bragg, and asked her to look into Roberts' record from her end. The response came back within hours. Major James Roberts was definitely a legitimate Medal of Honor recipient, awarded for actions during a 2008 engagement in Afghanistan. Armed with this information, Gonzalez faced a difficult decision. She could share what she had learned and potentially help clear up the misunderstanding, but doing so would require going around the chain of command and possibly contradicting her new commanding officer. On the other hand, allowing an injustice to continue when she had the power to stop it went against everything she believed in as a soldier. By evening, multiple independent investigations were underway throughout Fort Davidson. Word had spread beyond the base as well, as soldiers called friends and family members stationed elsewhere, asking about Major Roberts and trying to verify the incredible story they had heard. The military network was vast and interconnected, and once information started flowing through informal channels, it moved quickly and efficiently. Colonel Thompson remained unaware of this activity as he worked late in his office, reviewing base operations and preparing for the full inspection he had scheduled for the following morning. He was confident that his decisive action regarding Roberts had sent the right message about his expectations for honesty and integrity. In his mind, he was doing exactly what a good commanding officer should do, maintaining standards and ensuring that his soldiers represented themselves appropriately. Lieutenant Chen knocked on his door around 1900 hours, carrying a folder of documents. "Sir, I've begun the research you requested into Major Roberts' decorations. I have preliminary information here." Thompson looked up from the budget reports he had been reviewing. "What have you found, Lieutenant?" Chen opened the folder and consulted her notes. "Sir, I've confirmed that Major James Roberts is listed in Army personnel databases as a Medal of Honor recipient. The award was presented on March 15, 2009, for actions that took place during Operation Enduring Freedom." Thompson frowned, not expecting such a quick confirmation. "Are you certain this is the same James Roberts? There could be multiple soldiers with that name." "I cross-referenced service numbers, birth dates, and assignment history, sir. It's definitely our Major Roberts. The citation mentions actions taken during an engagement near Forward Operating Base Chapman in Afghanistan." Thompson set down his pen and looked at Chen carefully. This wasn't the outcome he had anticipated. He had expected to find either no record of the decoration or evidence that it had been awarded in error. A legitimate Medal of Honor presented by the Department of the Army was an entirely different situation. "Lieutenant, I want you to obtain complete documentation of this award. Citation, approval authority, presentation records, everything. If this is legitimate, I need to understand how someone with that level of recognition ended up in an administrative assignment at a training facility." Chen nodded and made notes in her folder. "Yes, sir. Should I also prepare documentation for restoring the medal to Major Roberts' authorized uniform items?" Thompson hesitated. His military training told him that if the decoration was legitimate, it should absolutely be restored immediately with appropriate apologies. But his pride and his certainty about his own judgment made it difficult to admit that he might have made a serious mistake.
Let's get the complete documentation first, Lieutenant. I want to review everything before making any decisions about restoration.
As Chen left to continue her research, Thompson sat back in his chair and considered the implications of what he was learning. If Roberts truly was a Medal of Honor recipient, and if his actions in Afghanistan had been extraordinary enough to merit the nation's highest military honor, then Thompson's assumptions about the man had been completely wrong. More troubling was the realization that he had publicly questioned the integrity of a genuine American hero, had forced him to remove the symbol of his extraordinary sacrifice, and had done so based on nothing more than preconceptions about what such a person should look like or where they should be assigned. Thompson walked to his window and looked out at the base that was now under his command. Lights were coming on in buildings across the installation as soldiers finished their daily duties and settled in for the evening. Somewhere among those buildings, Major Roberts was going about his evening routine, probably preparing reports and handling the administrative details that kept Fort Davidson running smoothly. The colonel was beginning to understand that he might have made a serious error in judgment, one that could have significant consequences for his command, his career, and, most importantly, for a soldier who had already given far more than most in service to his country. The full scope of that error, and the extraordinary story behind Roberts' Medal of Honor, was still unknown to Thompson. But, across Fort Davidson, soldiers who had served with Roberts, soldiers who had heard the stories, and soldiers who simply understood the weight of what had happened were working to uncover the truth. They were doing so not out of malice toward their new commanding officer, but out of respect for one of their own and for the principles of honor and integrity that defined their profession. The investigation that Thompson had ordered was about to reveal far more than he had anticipated, and the consequences of his hasty judgment were about to reshape his understanding of leadership, heroism, and the true meaning of military service. Technical Sergeant Park's research had expanded beyond simple database queries. Through his network of contacts across various installations, he had managed to reach Sergeant First Class Tommy Martinez, who had served with Roberts during the 2008 deployment to Afghanistan. Martinez was now stationed at Fort Carson, and when Park explained the situation at Fort Davidson, Martinez's response was immediate and passionate.
"You're telling me someone questioned Jimmy Roberts' Medal of Honor?" Martinez said over the secure phone line.
"Park, I was there when he earned that medal. I saw what he did, and I'm alive today because of his actions.
If someone's questioning his integrity, they need to hear the real story."
Park quickly set up a conference call with several other soldiers who were interested in learning the truth. Within an hour, he had Martinez, Staff Sergeant Gonzalez, and Captain Rodriguez connected, along with two other NCOs who had heard about the situation and wanted to help set the record straight. Martinez's voice was steady but emotional as he began to recount the events that had led to Roberts' Medal of Honor. This happened in November 2008, near Forward Operating Base Chapman. Roberts was a staff sergeant then, team leader for a convoy security unit. "We were escorting a supply convoy through a valley that intelligence said was relatively secure." The others listened intently as Martinez painted the picture of that day. The convoy had consisted of 12 vehicles carrying critical supplies to an isolated outpost. Roberts' team was responsible for security, riding in armored Humvees positioned throughout the convoy to provide protection against the roadside bombs and ambushes that had become common in the region. "The attack came out of nowhere," Martinez continued. "IED took out the lead vehicle, and then we started taking fire from 3 different positions in the hills.
Complex ambush, perfectly coordinated. We were trapped in a kill zone with nowhere to go."
Captain Rodriguez felt her throat tighten as she listened to the description. She had counseled soldiers dealing with the aftermath of similar attacks, and she knew the level of chaos and terror that Martinez was describing. Martinez went on to explain how the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The convoy was stopped, taking heavy fire from enemy positions that had clear lines of sight down the entire length of the vehicles. Several soldiers had been wounded in the initial attack, including the convoy commander, and communication with headquarters had been cut off by damaged radio equipment.
"That's when Roberts took charge," Martinez said.
"He didn't wait for orders, didn't hesitate even though he wasn't the senior guy present. He saw what needed to happen and he made it happen." What Roberts had done next, according to Martinez's detailed account, had saved the lives of every soldier in that convoy. Recognizing that they were sitting targets in their current position, Roberts had organized a coordinated response that involved suppressing enemy fire while evacuating wounded soldiers and establishing a defensive perimeter that could hold until reinforcements arrived. The most extraordinary part of Roberts' actions had come when he realized that several wounded soldiers were trapped in a vehicle that was taking direct fire from enemy positions. The vehicle was too damaged to move, and anyone approaching it would be exposed to intense enemy fire from multiple directions. Roberts made 3 trips, Martinez said, his voice growing quiet with the weight of memory. 3 separate times, he left our defensive position and crossed open ground under heavy fire to reach that vehicle. First trip, he got Private Jackson out. Kid had taken shrapnel in both legs and couldn't move on his own. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez found herself holding her breath as Martinez continued the story. She had always known Major Roberts as a quiet, competent administrator. The image of him repeatedly exposing himself to enemy fire to save wounded soldiers was almost impossible to reconcile with the man she saw every day managing supply inventories. Second trip was for Corporal Williams, Martinez continued. Williams had been hit in the chest and was losing consciousness. Roberts had to carry him the entire way back to our position, all while taking fire from at least 2 different enemy positions. The third trip, according to Martinez, had been the most dangerous. By that time, the enemy had adjusted their fire patterns and were specifically targeting the route Roberts had been using. The remaining trapped soldier, Specialist David Chen, was unconscious and critically wounded.
Roberts knew it was probably suicide, Martinez said. We all knew it.
But he looked at us and said, "Chen's not dying on my watch," and, before anyone could stop him, he was moving again. What happened next had become the stuff of legend among the soldiers who witnessed it. Roberts had not only reached the damaged vehicle and extracted the wounded soldier, but, when enemy fire became so intense that his return route was completely blocked, he had taken up a position behind the vehicle and single-handedly held off enemy fighters until air support could arrive.
He held that position for 45 minutes, Martinez said. Alone, with limited ammunition, keeping the enemy pinned down and away from the rest of us.
When the Apache helicopters finally showed up and cleared the area, they found Roberts still conscious, still fighting, even though he'd taken 2 rounds himself. The silence on the conference call was profound as the participants absorbed the magnitude of what they had just heard. This wasn't just a story of individual heroism, it was a testament to the kind of selfless courage that defined the best of military service. Park was the first to speak.
Martinez, is all of this documented? Can you provide verification of these events? Everything's documented, Martinez replied. After-action reports, witness statements, medical records for the soldiers Roberts saved. Chen, Jackson, and Williams all survived because of what Roberts did that day. The citation for his Medal of Honor covers all of it, though it doesn't really capture what it felt like to be there. Captain Rodriguez realized she needed to take immediate action. As chaplain, she had a responsibility to ensure that soldiers under her care were treated fairly, and it was becoming clear that a serious injustice was taking place. Martinez, would you be willing to provide written testimony about these events? Something we can present to Colonel Thompson?
Absolutely, Martinez replied without hesitation. And I can get statements from the other guys who were there too. This is bigger than just defending Roberts' honor, though that's important enough. This is about making sure people understand what real leadership looks like. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Chen had continued her official research into Roberts' service record, and the documentation she was uncovering painted an increasingly detailed picture of an exceptional military career. The Medal of Honor citation was just the beginning. Roberts had also been awarded the Bronze Star with V device twice, the Purple Heart, and numerous other decorations for valor and meritorious service. More significantly, Chen had discovered that Roberts' current assignment wasn't the result of being shuffled aside or hidden away. He had specifically requested the administrative role after completing his combat tours, wanting to use his experience to support other soldiers and ensure that frontline units had the logistical support they needed to operate effectively. The request letter in his personnel file was revealing in its modesty. Rather than seeking high-profile assignments or positions that would capitalize on his Medal of Honor status, Roberts had asked to be placed where he could continue serving soldiers and the mission without the distraction of public attention. He had specifically mentioned wanting to work behind the scenes, ensuring that younger soldiers had the equipment, training, and support they needed to succeed. Chen brought this information to Colonel Thompson's office at 0800 hours the following morning, along with additional documentation she had obtained overnight. The full Medal of Honor citation made for sobering reading, and, when combined with the broader service record, it painted a picture of a soldier whose dedication went far beyond what was required or expected. Thompson read through the materials carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each page. The citation was detailed and specific, describing actions that clearly met the criteria for the nation's highest military honor. The witness statements, after-action reports, and command recommendations all supported the award, and there was absolutely no indication of any irregularities in the approval process. What was perhaps most striking to Thompson was the contrast between Roberts' documented heroism and his current demeanor. The man who had risked everything to save his fellow soldiers was the same quiet, professional officer who had stood at attention in this very office and calmly accepted the order to remove his medal without protest or explanation. "Lieutenant, I need you to arrange a meeting with Major Roberts immediately," Thompson said, setting down the documentation. "And I want you to prepare a written summary of everything we've learned about his service record." Chen nodded, but hesitated before leaving. "Sir, there's one more thing. I've been hearing from various sources that soldiers throughout the base are conducting their own investigations into this matter. Apparently, several people have been reaching out to contacts at other installations, trying to verify Major Roberts' story." Thompson felt a chill as he realized the implications of what Chen was saying. If word of his accusations against a Medal of Honor recipient had spread beyond Fort Davidson, the consequences could be serious not just for Roberts, but for Thompson's own career and reputation. Questioning the integrity of a legitimate Medal of Honor recipient without cause was not something the military hierarchy would view favorably. "What kind of information are they uncovering?" Thompson asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "According to what I'm hearing, sir, everything confirms Major Roberts' legitimacy and suggests that his actions in Afghanistan were even more extraordinary than the official citation indicates. Several soldiers who served with him have apparently provided detailed accounts of the engagement that led to his Medal of Honor." Thompson stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the base where word of his mistake was undoubtedly spreading through informal channels. He was beginning to understand that he had made more than a simple error in judgment. He had committed a serious breach of military protocol and personal honor. The weight of what he had done was becoming clearer with each piece of information that came to light. He had publicly humiliated a genuine American hero based on nothing more than assumptions and prejudice. He had forced a Medal of Honor recipient to remove the symbol of his extraordinary sacrifice because it didn't fit Thompson's preconceived notions about what such a person should look like. More troubling still was the realization that Roberts had accepted the unjust treatment without protest, had maintained his military bearing and professional demeanor even while being subjected to what amounted to a public attack on his character and integrity. The quiet dignity with which Roberts had handled the situation actually made Thompson's mistake more glaring, not less. "Lieutenant, schedule that meeting with Major Roberts for 0930 hours, Thompson said, his voice heavy with the weight of what needed to be done. "And prepare documentation for immediately restoring his Medal of Honor to his authorized uniform items." As Chen left to make the arrangements, Thompson remained at his window, contemplating the difficult conversation that lay ahead. He would need to acknowledge his error, apologize for his unjust actions, and somehow find a way to restore the dignity and respect that Roberts deserved. But he was beginning to understand that some mistakes couldn't simply be corrected with an apology and a return of confiscated property. The damage to Roberts' reputation, the public questioning of his integrity, and the breach of trust that had occurred would have consequences that extended far beyond a single conversation in a colonel's office. Thompson had learned something important about assumptions and prejudice, but the lesson had come at a significant cost to a soldier who deserved far better treatment from his commanding officer. The truth about Roberts' heroism was now emerging from multiple sources, painting a picture of extraordinary courage and selfless service. But Thompson was about to learn that understanding the truth was only the first step in addressing the injustice he had committed. Major Roberts reported to Colonel Thompson's office at precisely 0930 hours, his uniform immaculate as always, though noticeably missing the Medal of Honor that should have been among his decorations. His posture was perfect, his expression neutral, showing no hint of the emotional toll the previous day's events had taken. Thompson, watching Roberts enter, was struck by the man's dignity and professionalism despite the injustice he had suffered. Major Roberts reporting as ordered, "Sir," Roberts said, his salute crisp and precise. Thompson returned the salute, then gestured toward the chair across from his desk. Between them lay the Medal of Honor that Roberts had been forced to remove, along with a thick folder of documentation that Lieutenant Chen had compiled. The weight of what was about to occur hung heavy in the air. "Major, please be seated," Thompson said, his voice noticeably different from the authoritative tone he had used the previous day. "I've asked you here to discuss the findings of our investigation into your service record." Roberts took his seat but remained at attention, his hands positioned precisely on his knees. His eyes flickered briefly to the medal on the desk but returned immediately to Thompson's face, awaiting whatever was to come. Thompson picked up the folder and opened it, though he had already memorized its contents. "Major, I've reviewed extensive documentation of your service record, including the complete citation for your Medal of Honor, witness statements from soldiers who served with you, and after-action reports from your deployment to Afghanistan." He paused, the weight of his next words difficult to bear. "I owe you a profound apology, Major. My actions yesterday were based on assumptions and prejudice rather than facts. I questioned your integrity without cause, and I forced you to remove a decoration that you earned through extraordinary heroism and sacrifice." Robert's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he was processing the significance of what Thompson was saying. Years of military service had taught him to expect the unexpected, but having his honor publicly questioned and then restored within 24 hours was something he had never experienced. Thompson continued, his voice growing stronger as he forced himself to confront the full scope of his mistake. "Major, I've learned about the engagement near Forward Operating Base Chapman in November 2008. I've read the accounts of your actions in saving 3 wounded soldiers under heavy enemy fire, of your decision to hold a defensive position alone for 45 minutes against overwhelming odds." He gestured toward the medal on his desk. "This decoration represents not just your individual courage, but the lives you saved and the example you set for every soldier who serves under our flag. My questioning of its legitimacy was not only wrong, it was a disgrace to everything this medal represents." Roberts spoke for the first time since entering the office. "Sir, I appreciate your words, but I want you to understand that my concern isn't for my own reputation. The medal represents the sacrifice of every soldier who served in that convoy, and questioning it dishonors their service as well as mine." Thompson felt the full weight of Roberts' response. This wasn't about personal vindication or wounded pride, it was about respect for the sacrifices made by soldiers in combat, about the meaning of military honor, and about the responsibility leaders have to their subordinates. "You're absolutely right, Major," Thompson replied. "My actions reflected not just poor judgment about you personally, but a failure to understand what military honor truly means. I allowed my preconceptions about what a Medal of Honor recipient should look like to override my responsibility to treat all soldiers with the respect they deserve." Thompson stood and picked up the Medal of Honor, holding it carefully in both hands. "Major Roberts, it would be my honor to restore this decoration to its rightful place on your uniform. But, more than that, I want to publicly acknowledge the error I made and ensure that everyone on this base understands the true nature of your service." Roberts considered this for a moment before responding. "Colonel, I appreciate the gesture, but I would prefer to avoid any public attention. I've spent my career trying to serve without fanfare, and I'd like to continue doing so." The response was characteristic of the man Thompson was beginning to understand Roberts to be. Even in a moment when he could have demanded public vindication, Roberts was more concerned with continuing his quiet service than with restoring his own reputation. "Major, I understand your preference, but I have a responsibility to correct the record," Thompson said. "Word of yesterday's incident has spread throughout the base, and soldiers deserve to know the truth. However, we'll handle it in a way that respects your wishes for privacy." As Thompson prepared to repin the Medal of Honor to Robert's uniform, there was a knock on the office door.
Lieutenant Chen entered with an urgent expression on her face.
"Colonel, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation developing," Chen said.
"Several media outlets have apparently gotten word of yesterday's incident. I've received calls from 3 different news organizations asking for comment about a Medal of Honor recipient being ordered to remove his decoration."
Thompson felt his stomach drop as he realized the implications. Military scandals involving Medal of Honor recipients drew intense media attention, and if the story broke publicly, it would bring scrutiny not just to Fort Davidson but to the entire chain of command.
"How did this information reach the media?"
Thompson asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "It appears that soldiers throughout the base have been researching Major Roberts' background and sharing information through social media and other channels," Chen replied. "Some of the details have apparently reached veterans groups and military advocacy organizations outside the base." Roberts looked uncomfortable with this development. "Colonel, if I may suggest, perhaps we could issue a brief statement clarifying that the situation has been resolved and that no wrongdoing occurred. I have no desire to see this become a public controversy." Thompson appreciated Roberts' continued professionalism, but he was beginning to understand that the consequences of his actions extended far beyond what could be resolved with a simple apology and restoration of the medal. The story was already beyond their control, and how they handled the next few hours would determine whether it became a minor news item or a major scandal. "Major, I agree that we need to control the narrative, but we also need to be completely honest about what happened," Thompson said. "I made a serious error in judgment, and I'm prepared to take full responsibility for that error." Over the next hour, Thompson, Roberts, and Lieutenant Chen worked together to craft a response that would address the media inquiries while respecting Roberts' privacy. The statement acknowledged that there had been a misunderstanding regarding Roberts' decorations, that the matter had been quickly resolved, and that the base commander took full responsibility for any confusion that had occurred. What they couldn't control, however, was the broader conversation that was developing among military personnel, veterans, and military families across the country. Social media posts were sharing details about Roberts' heroism, about the injustice he had suffered, and about the broader issues of leadership and respect within the military hierarchy. By afternoon, Thompson was receiving phone calls from his superiors, who had been alerted to the situation by media inquiries. The conversation with his brigade commander was particularly difficult, as Thompson had to explain how he had managed to create a public relations crisis within 24 hours of assuming command. "Colonel Thompson, I want to understand exactly how this situation developed," his commander said over the secure phone line. "You're telling me you ordered a Medal of Honor recipient to remove his decoration based purely on assumptions about his background?" Thompson took a deep breath before responding. "Yes, sir. I made a serious error in judgment. Major Roberts had been assigned to administrative duties, and I incorrectly assumed that meant he hadn't seen combat or earned his decorations through legitimate means." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Thompson knew he was facing not just professional embarrassment but potentially serious consequences for his career. Publicly questioning the integrity of a Medal of Honor recipient was not something the military hierarchy would overlook. "Colonel, this kind of incident reflects poorly not just on you but on the entire command structure," his superior finally said. "I want a complete after-action report on my desk within 48 hours, along with your recommendations for ensuring this type of situation never occurs again." As Thompson ended the call, he realized that the consequences of his actions were still unfolding. The immediate crisis might be resolved, but the broader implications for his career, his command, and the trust soldiers had in their leadership would be felt for much longer. Roberts spent the remainder of the day dealing with the aftermath in his own way. Soldiers throughout the base approached him with expressions of support and respect, many learning for the first time about his background and his heroic service. He handled each interaction with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout the crisis, neither seeking attention nor avoiding the conversations that naturally arose. Staff Sergeant Gonzalez found him in his office late that afternoon, working on the same inventory reports he had been preparing before the crisis began. "Major, I wanted to thank you," she said. Watching how you handled this situation has taught me something important about leadership and integrity. Roberts looked up from his paperwork. Sergeant, I just did what any soldier should do, maintained my bearing and continued with my duties. The uniform and the mission are bigger than any individual situation. It was exactly the response Gonzalez had expected, and it reinforced her respect for the man who had quietly served alongside her for 3 years without ever mentioning his extraordinary background. As the day ended, Thompson remained in his office, contemplating the lessons he had learned in such a painful way. He had always prided himself on his military judgment, his attention to detail, and his commitment to proper standards. But this experience had revealed blind spots in his thinking that were both humbling and embarrassing. The Medal of Honor was back on Robert's uniform where it belonged, the immediate crisis had been managed, and the media attention was already beginning to fade. But Thompson knew that the real work was just beginning. He needed to examine his own assumptions and prejudices, to understand how he had so badly misjudged a soldier under his command, and to find ways to ensure that his leadership was based on facts and fairness rather than preconceptions. Robert's quiet heroism had taught Thompson something about the nature of military service and leadership that no amount of training or education could have provided. True honor wasn't about public recognition or prestigious assignments, it was about the character displayed when no one was watching, the sacrifices made for others, and the dignity maintained even under unjust treatment. The incident at Fort Davidson would be remembered as a case study in the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, of treating all soldiers with respect regardless of their current assignment, and of understanding that heroism often came in quiet, unassuming packages. For Colonel Thompson, it was a lesson in leadership that would influence every decision he made for the rest of his military career. Major Roberts returned to his duties with the same professional dedication he had always shown, his Medal of Honor once again in its proper place, representing not just his own extraordinary service but the sacrifices of all soldiers who answered the call to serve when their country needed them most. The true measure of his character had been revealed not in the moment of his heroism in Afghanistan, but in how he had handled the injustice at Fort Davidson with dignity, grace, and unwavering commitment to his duty and his fellow soldiers.